It took Howard 20 years before he could tell anyone about a terrifying and mysterious incident during his childhood. On a hot summer's day in Regina, Saskatchewan, Howard and Mike were chasing two other friends around Howard's backyard. The 8-year-old boys were all obsessed with a popular 1970s TV show called Starsky and Hutch, which featured a pair of police detectives. In the game they were playing, Howard and Mike were enacting the heroes' roles, while the other two pretended to be the criminals. The case ensued rather dangerously around Howard's swing set, where one misstep could throw them face first into the rusty metal surround. This caused the two friends to slow down, spurring on Howard and Mike. Aware that he was about to be caught, one of the boys playing a criminal threw the item he'd stolen, Mike's tennis shoe, high up into the air. The shoe was seen to glide over Howard's back fence, across the back alley behind his house, and into the neighbour's backyard. Mike momentarily panicked as he watched his shoe disappear from sight. He had taken off both shoes at the start of the game because they were brand new, and he knew his parents would be upset if he came home with them covered in grass stains. He definitely couldn't return home with just one shoe, which would be worse than appearing with two dirty shoes. However, retrieving the chucked shoe would not be easy, as it had been thrown directly into the yard of a neighbour known locally as the Bat Lady. The boys stopped their game and sat around on the grass to consider their options, well aware that these were very limited. They decided that they couldn't ask Howard's mother for help, as she had a strict rule of not disturbing the neighbours. She would definitely not be sympathetic to their new predicament, and the boys could also not simply knock on the so-called Bat Lady's front door and ask for her help. They had already had various unpleasant encounters with her over the years, often when caught attempting to retrieve a baseball that had been hit over into her yard. The friends called her the Bat Lady because the scary woman was always dressed in black from head to toe, and when she ordered them from her yard, she ran, shrieking and flapping her arms like large leathery wings. The only option any of the boys could contemplate as a possible goer was to sneak into her yard and hope for a stroke of luck. Perhaps the Bat Lady would be out or having an afternoon nap, and they wouldn't be nabbed. The boys all agreed that Howard was the strongest climber, so they selected him for the job. His heart was racing as he crossed over the back alley and then paused in front of the Bat Lady's rear fence. The fence planks were tall and misshapen, weathered by decades of sun and snow. The real challenge was not so much climbing the fence to enter the backyard, but then scaling the fence in order to leave. It was one thing to tackle the task with all the time in the world, but another to attempt it with someone in hot pursuit, throwing curses and threats at one's back. Peering between the fence slats, Howard spotted the shoe. It had landed amongst some bedraggled tomato plants in the Bat Lady's garden. He would need to run through the vegetable patch to save time, which would undoubtedly anger the Bat Lady even more than dashing across her yellow grass. But that was a risk he had to take. Thankfully, the shoe was nearer the fence rather than the house, buying him a small amount of time. And then Howard noticed something else encouraging that he'd never seen before, and which made him feel more confident about his odds of success. A rickety gate was now evident at the far end of the fence, previously unnoticeable along the ramshackle structure. It had a lift and pull latch over the handle and wasn't fitted with a lock, so would enable him to exit the backyard much more quickly without having to climb the fence. Howard was now thinking his foray would be easy as he stepped up onto a garbage can to skirt over the fence, unaware of how wrong he could be. Hopping over the fence, he landed lopsidedly, twisting his right ankle and yelling in pain. He stood up quickly, his ankle hurting but not badly enough to stop him, so he made a dash into the garden. He quickly bent to pick up Mike's tennis shoe when he noticed that it was suddenly flanked by two others, a pair of worn-out, black shoes. Chillingly, he realised that, wearing the pair of black shoes, the Bat Lady stood above him. Howard looked up in terror and was confronted by her piercing black eyes glaring down at him sternly. He had never been so close to her before, and in a repulsed split second, he noticed that her hair was matted and greasy, her skin wrinkled and grimy. The scowling woman's body was just skin and bones, and she had no teeth. Staring malevolently at Howard, she raised a gnarled finger accusingly, filling him with dread at what she may do next. Not wanting to find out, he turned and ran like his life depended on reaching the gate before she did. The Bat Lady yelled, muttered and cursed him as he fled. Horrifyingly, her fingers pulled on the back of his shirt. Howard was astonished that the old woman was fast enough to keep up with him and didn't dare turn his head to look at her. He quickened his pace and managed to break free from her grasp, reaching the gate in record time. He opened the latch and pulled on it with all his might. However, the gate refused to budge. It was stuck in the ground and clearly hadn't been used for years or decades. He was trapped as if a fly in a spider's web. Howard turned around to meet his fate and then gasped. The Bat Lady was no longer there, her backyard empty. This didn't make any sense, as the yard was too large and the house too far away for her to have returned back inside. There was no other place where she could have hidden from sight. Plus, it was completely out of character for her to have withdrawn before teaching Howard a lesson for trespassing into her property. His confusion frightened him even more than the imminent threat of the Bat Lady catching him, but still wanting out, Howard found an empty milk crate to step onto, enabling him to vault over the fence to safety. His friends were desperate to hear what had happened and why he had taken so long to return, and after catching his breath and calming down, he told them everything. Strangely, they didn't seem to believe him, as they hadn't heard a sound for the entire time he'd been gone, and the Bat Lady was usually so loud she could be heard a few streets away in all directions. Also, why had Howard even entered her yard if she was already out there? This he couldn't explain, except to insist that she hadn't been standing in the garden when he hopped over the fence. But if that was right, how had she just appeared so suddenly, as if out of thin air? Feeling sickened by his experience, Howard couldn't stomach any more of his friends' questions, despite them wanting more details. Howard handed Mike his shoe and went inside, straight to his bedroom, where he remained in solitude until his mother called him for dinner. As he wasn't hungry, he picked away at his food, simply wanting to finish enough so as to be allowed to leave the table. He hardly said a word and barely registered what his parents and sister Wendy were discussing. It was something to do with the police being called to their neighbourhood late the previous night, and then concerning some unfortunate person who had come across a gruesome discovery. Howard's mind was preoccupied by the Bat Lady and trying to work out how she had disappeared as suddenly as she had appeared. Wendy was asking their parents how long had she been there, were there bugs? But Howard was too engrossed in his thoughts to hear their answers. Finally, he went back to his room. About 2 hours later, Wendy walked into Howard's room and had to rap on his door to get his attention. She seemed bursting with something she wanted to tell him, despite Howard being distracted and disinterested. Finally, she got it out. She had overheard their parents discussing something in the den after dinner. There were bugs, she said, with a combination of morbid curiosity and outright disgust. She said their father had figured out that a certain person had been there for days, maybe more than a week, before someone found her. When Howard didn't react or comment, Wendy became frustrated, particularly when he told her that he didn't know what she was talking about. "That old lady living across the alley," she shouted. "She's dead and lay there for ages, but no one found her until last night." Both children were unnerved by the event, but Howard even more so, as he had seen, heard and felt the horrific presence of the Bat Lady. Wendy walked out of the room and slammed the door shut, Then Howard felt a sudden shiver seize his body, chilling his veins and making him wish he was not alone. Howard's friends asked him to again come out and play the next day, but Howard declined without explanation. He didn't even dare go into his own backyard for some days, and he avoided going anywhere near the Bat Lady's house, not even when a new family moved in. They did a complete makeover on the house, including the backyard, where they replaced the old wooden fence with one made of metal chain links. Over time, the grass turned green once more and the garden plants returned to a healthy state. But Howard was changed forever. His friends asked him for more details about what had occurred when he'd been alone in the Bat Lady's yard. However, Howard said nothing. It was to be another 20 years before he felt able to share his experience with anyone. Paranormal researcher Joel A. Sutherland, who writes of it in his Haunted Canada series,